The sun beats down like a hammer on your skull. The ground is cracked into sharp patterns that haven't seen rain in months. The air ripples as if the whole world is melting, and your throat feels raw, dry, and heavy. Around you stretches nothing but desert, no rivers, no wells, not even the comfort of a plastic bottle. Just heat, silence, and the growing awareness that without water, time is short. In a place like this, the body begins to collapse in only 3 days. Muscles weaken, the mind clouds, and before the week is done, thirst wins. Now raise the stakes. It isn't only you. Your children, your spouse, your entire community, all of you depend on finding water here. Every missed clue is a step closer to disaster. Yet Native American tribes lived here for centuries. They didn't scrape by, they thrived. What looked like lifeless wasteland to outsiders was to them a living map. If you were dropped in the desert with nothing but your instincts, where would you search first for water? Follow the animals, dig in the dry washes, or trust the plants? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm curious to see who might have the best survival instinct. You and I might spend hours arguing with the GPS that insists there's a cafe nearby. They could glance at the sky, note the season, and know exactly where to dig. That wasn't luck or magic, it was knowledge. Patient, tested, passed down through generations. Knowledge that turned one of the harshest places on Earth into a home. But here's the real weight of it. In the desert, survival wasn't about convenience. It was about the body's unforgiving clock. A race against thirst that no one could ignore. Here's the stake. The human body runs on a strict schedule when it comes to water. You can go without food for weeks if you must, but the moment you lose access to water, the countdown begins. Within a single day, your mouth dries, your skin tightens, and lifting your arms feels like you're moving lead weights. By the third day, muscles weaken, your mind clouds, and even walking feels like dragging a stone behind you. Stretch it to a week, and survival slips from unlikely to nearly impossible. In a desert, thirst is not a minor discomfort. It is a death sentence set to a clock. And yet, this is the very landscape Native American communities called home for centuries. To the untrained eye, it looked impossible. Miles of sand, punishing heat, skies that promised rain yet rarely delivered. Outsiders often believed no one could endure such conditions. But Native peoples did more than endure. They flourished. They built homes that lasted, cultivated fields, raised children, and developed cultures so rich that their influence is still woven into modern life today. Their success did not rest on luck, nor on waiting helplessly for the clouds to break open. Their secret was knowledge, careful observation, experimentation, and above all, respect for the land. What others saw as emptiness, they saw as a library of survival strategies written in the language of nature. A hollow in a rock was not just a dent in the landscape. It could serve as a water tank after a storm. A bird circling low was not merely part of the scenery. It was a guide pointing the way to a hidden spring. It is easy for us to call this ingenuity, but in truth, it was patience turned into wisdom. They listened to the land more closely than most of us listen to one another. And perhaps here is where a little humor is fair. While we might lose patience waiting for a waiter to refill a glass of water, they could wait for months, knowing exactly when and where to find the Earth's hidden reserves. Water was never just a resource, it was sacred, a gift to be honored. With that wisdom, Native Americans transformed one of the harshest landscapes on Earth into more than a place to survive. They made it a home. But to understand how they did it, we need to step back and see the land they were up against. A desert that could burn you by day, freeze you by night, and still demand your respect at every turn. Let us step back in time and place ourselves in the American Southwest, a landscape that stretches across what we now know as Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, parts of California, and beyond. This is not a land of gentle seasons. Summers here can blaze, with heat so intense it feels as though the air itself is on fire, while winters bring a surprising chill that bites through skin and bone. Rain is scarce, often absent for months, and when it does come, is welcomed like gold falling from the sky. To those unfamiliar with it, this region might seem barren, a wasteland of rock, dust, and endless horizons. But to those who lived here for centuries, the land was very much alive. It whispered its secrets to anyone willing to listen carefully. Outsiders, whether European settlers or later travelers, often viewed these deserts as impossible environments. They saw danger at every turn: scorching sun, freezing nights, rattlesnakes coiled beneath rocks, and endless stretches without a drop of visible water. To them, survival seemed improbable. But to indigenous peoples, the Apache, Hopi, Tohono Hohokam, and many more, this was not an enemy to be feared. It was a teacher, strict and demanding, but generous to those who paid attention. Every dune, every cactus, every bird in the sky was a part of a larger textbook of survival. The land itself was the classroom, and knowledge was the only fee for admission. Take, for instance, the dunes and dry washes that outsiders might dismiss as empty stretches of sand. To Indigenous eyes, these were maps, pointing to places where rainwater might briefly collect, or where underground streams could sometimes be tapped. A cactus was not just a thorny plant waiting to prick the careless wanderer. It was a reservoir, its shape and placement hinting at deeper truths about the soil and water beneath. Even the behavior of birds carried meaning. A hawk circling low might indicate prey gathering near a water source. Small flocks darting repeatedly in one direction could reveal the location of a hidden spring. To the trained observer, the desert was never silent. It spoke in signs and patterns, waiting for those who could understand its language. Survival in such a place demanded more than strength. It demanded patience, memory, and community. Elders taught the young where to walk, where to dig, and where to wait. Knowledge was not written in books, but told through stories, songs, and ceremonies. A myth about a mountain or a star might sound like folklore to outsiders, but for those within the culture, it doubled as a practical guide, pointing the way to life-giving water. Here is where a touch of humor helps underline the difference. We, with our modern conveniences, often panic when the Wi-Fi signal drops or when the grocery store is out of bottled water. They, by contrast, read the tilt of the sun or the path of an animal and found what they needed. One might say they had better service than any GPS. To Indigenous peoples of the Southwest, the desert was not a void to be conquered. It was a vast, demanding partner. It offered no second chances. But for those who respected its lessons, it provided exactly enough. This balance between harshness and generosity shaped cultures that learned not only to survive, but to flourish in one of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth. And sometimes, that generosity revealed itself in the rarest of gifts. Secret reservoirs of water hidden in the very bones of the desert. When rains finally did arrive in the desert, even if only for a few hours, Indigenous communities were prepared. They knew exactly where to look because the land had already taught them where water liked to hide. Natural rock basins, carved slowly by centuries of wind and erosion, became precious reservoirs. After a storm, clear pools gathered in these stone hollows, shimmering under the sun like liquid jewels. To stumble upon one was more than luck. It was life itself waiting in a rocky bowl. These basins were not discovered by accident each time. Tribes remembered them, recorded them in memory, and passed their locations down through stories, landmarks, and oral tradition. A child might grow up hearing a tale about a certain rock shaped like an eagle's wing, and know that after the rains, water could always be found at its base. For them, these were not just directions. They were lessons woven into identity, shared across generations, so no one would be left wandering without guidance. But here lay the catch. The desert has a way of breaking its promises. Storms might roll in one year and vanish for the next. Pools that once brimmed with life could dry into dusty bowls within days. Imagine walking for hours under a blistering sun, following the words of your elders, only to arrive at a basin that is cracked and empty. The disappointment would not just sting, it could kill. That uncertainty forced people to adapt, to never rely on a single source, and to always carry more knowledge than they needed. In such moments, survival demanded creativity. Some groups dug shallow wells near those same basins, following the dampness beneath the rock until they struck hidden moisture. Others studied animal tracks, knowing deer and small mammals often led the way to secret pools. The land always offered options, but only to those who paid attention. Now, if you or I went searching today, chances are we would end up with sunburn and sore feet, complaining loudly about how nature had betrayed us. They, however, would have already thought of a second option, and a third, and a fourth. It was not luck, nor stubbornness, it was preparation. For desert peoples, a pool of rainwater was never taken for granted. It was a gift, brief and precious, to be honored, remembered, and used wisely. And when the pools failed, they were ready to move on to the next chapter in their survival. In the desert, plants were more than food or shade. They were allies in the fight for survival. Modern films may show a desperate cowboy slicing open a cactus and drinking like he has just uncorked a bottle of spring water. But the truth is far less glamorous and far more fascinating. Take the towering saguaro cactus, for example. Rising like green sentinels across the Sonoran landscape, they could reach 40 feet high and live for centuries. Their flesh, when carefully harvested, could be pulped into a paste that provided moisture. It was not a refreshing drink by any means. Bitter, pulpy, and about as appealing as chewing on damp cardboard. But when your throat is dry and the horizon offers nothing else, it was enough to keep you moving. The agave plant offered another resource. With thick leaves and a dense heart, it could be roasted to release fibers rich in moisture. Those fibers, chewed slowly, gave bursts of hydration along with sustenance. Agave was so important that it became a staple, not just for survival, but for food, drink, and ceremony. And then there was the mesquite tree. Its beans, ground into flour, became a vital food source. But perhaps more importantly, its roots reached deep into hidden water tables. For indigenous gatherers, this was a clue. If mesquite thrived in an area, there was a good chance that water could be found beneath the surface. Here lies the important twist. Not every cactus or plant is a lifesaver. In fact, most will not yield a drop you can safely consume. Some are outright harmful, delivering fluids that cause nausea or worse. Knowledge made the difference between life and death. Elders taught which plants could be trusted, how to prepare them, and when to avoid them entirely. For us today, the idea of chewing cactus pulp or gnawing roasted fibers may not sound appetizing. We are spoiled by grocery stores and water bottles within arm's reach. But imagine walking beneath the desert sun, lips cracked, and finding relief inside a thorn-covered plant. It may not be sweet or satisfying, but in that moment, it would taste better than the finest wine. And yet, even with all this botanical wisdom, the desert still tested its people. Sometimes the plants offered too little, or none at all. In those moments, survival depended on turning from nature's green reservoirs to human ingenuity, engineering solutions that went beyond what the land immediately gave. And this is where the story takes an extraordinary turn, because one people refused to simply survive the desert. They redesigned it. The Hohokam people did not sit around waiting for clouds to bless them with rain. They refused to gamble with chance. Instead, they bent the desert to their will through engineering and persistence. With stone tools, wooden implements, and sheer determination, they carved an astonishing network of canals that stretched for hundreds of miles across the Sonoran landscape. These channels captured the rare floodwaters of desert rivers, guiding them carefully into fields where crops could flourish. What looks today like a harsh and empty plain was, under their hands, transformed into a landscape of green. The canals were not shallow ditches either. Some measured over 10 feet wide and miles long, with careful gradients that carried water without spilling or stagnating. Alongside them, the Hohokam constructed earthen dams to trap runoff from seasonal rains. Clay-lined reservoirs stored the water for months, preventing it from seeping back into the desert floor. To maintain these systems, entire communities worked together, digging, reinforcing, and cleaning the canals season after season. It was a labor that required unity and discipline, but the reward was life. Fields of corn, beans, squash, and cotton, all growing where outsiders would have sworn nothing could survive. Archaeologists today continue to marvel at this achievement, often comparing it to the great irrigation works of the Old World. It rivals the canals of Mesopotamia and the Nile Basin, yet it was built without beasts of burden or metal tools. Imagine standing in that desert centuries ago, watching a field of crops sway in the breeze under the same blistering sun that would have killed the unprepared traveler. To an outsider, it must have seemed like magic, but to the Hohokam, it was the fruit of knowledge and sweat. Of course, even genius has its limits. Droughts could stretch for years, drying rivers to dust and leaving canals empty. Reservoirs shrank and the land turned brittle again. For a community dependent on such systems, this presented a constant danger. And so the people adapted once more, looking beyond their canals to other sources of water. They dug deeper into the earth, tapping hidden springs, and they read the signs of the desert just as carefully as other tribes did. Birds, plants, and shifting soils became guides when rivers betrayed them. Here is where a small smile is allowed. We might complain if our lawn sprinklers stop working for an afternoon, but the Hohokam faced the collapse of entire water networks and still found ways to endure. They built redundancies, they shifted their planting schedules, and they leaned on generations of stored wisdom. Water was never guaranteed, so planning for its absence was just as important as celebrating its presence. In the end, their canals stand as more than ancient infrastructure. They are reminders of resilience, of a people who refuse to let the desert dictate their fate. With ingenuity, cooperation, and relentless effort, they made the land yield. Yet even these water highways were only part of the story. When the earth hardened and rivers dried, the search for survival pressed onward, forcing new strategies and deeper respect for every drop that could be found. But survival in the desert was never just about digging deeper or building smarter. It was about listening to something greater. Wait until you see how the search for water became a matter of spirit as much as survival. Here is where survival touched the spiritual. For many indigenous tribes of the Southwest, water was not only a physical necessity, it was sacred, the very essence of life. To find it required more than sharp eyes or strong hands. It required listening to the desert, treating the land as if it were speaking in a language of signs. That language was subtle, but to those who learned it, it was clear. Look upward. Birds circling slowly in the heat often revealed the presence of a hidden spring. Their flight patterns were not random. They returned again and again to the same invisible source. Watch the soil. Patches of green reeds or clusters of willows hinted at underground water moving quietly below the surface. Follow the animals. Deer, rabbits, and other creatures carved trails that often led straight to watering holes, for they too understood the land's offerings. What looked like ordinary wilderness to an outsider was, to a trained observer, a map written in movement, color, and sound. But this knowledge ran deeper than observation. Elders preserved it in stories, myths, and ceremonies, teaching the next generation how to read the desert's cues. A tale about a star rising above a mountain might sound like bedtime folklore, but to those who knew, it was also a set of directions. Dig beneath this ridge when the constellation appears, and you will find water. Outsiders might laugh at the idea, dismissing it as superstition. In reality, it was survival science disguised as poetry. Oral tradition served as both compass and textbook, ensuring that children absorbed wisdom long before they ever needed to rely on it. This blending of the spiritual with the practical was not weakness, but strength. Treating water as sacred ensured that it was respected, never wasted. Every drop drawn from a spring, every basin uncovered in rock, carried both gratitude and caution. Water was life, but it was also a gift, one that demanded reverence. Entire villages grew around these hidden lifelines. Communities flourished where common sense might have insisted no settlement could stand. To modernize, it is tempting to see only ingenuity and skill, but for those who lived it, survival was always inseparable from belief. The land provided, but only if you listened carefully enough to hear it. And here's the part you might not expect. Wait until you see how this ancient knowledge is being used in our world today. Fast forward to today, and the wisdom that once kept small desert communities alive is now being rediscovered in places we might not expect. Desert survival schools across the Southwest teach soldiers, hikers, and even adventure tourists the same techniques indigenous peoples mastered centuries ago. The lessons are not about heroics, they are about observation. How to follow the path of animals that know where the last pools linger. How to identify plants that carry hidden moisture. How to read the land itself for signs of life. What may sound like romantic history is in reality practical training that can mean the difference between making it home or being remembered only by a search party. This knowledge is no longer confined to remote survival courses. It has entered the heart of modern cities. Phoenix, Tucson, and Las Vegas, cities that thrive in the desert through sheer engineering, now face the same problem that haunted indigenous peoples for centuries: scarcity. The Colorado River, once mighty, now shrinks under the pressure of overuse and relentless drought. Reservoirs like Lake Mead and Lake Powell, icons of 20th century engineering, have dropped to alarming levels. Suddenly, the water crisis is no longer an abstract worry. It is a daily reality for millions. Here is where the irony becomes almost poetic. Scientists, engineers, and policymakers are studying ancient canal systems built by the Hohokam, exploring indigenous desert farming methods, and even revisiting the use of plant-based water strategies. What once kept a few thousand people alive is now being viewed as a blueprint to sustain entire metropolitan regions. The old ways, once dismissed as primitive, are proving themselves both sophisticated and sustainable. And perhaps here we can allow a smile. For generations, modern society assumed technology would solve every problem. Yet here we are, circling back to ideas shaped by stone tools and oral tradition. While we busy ourselves with desalination plants and high-tech irrigation systems, it turns out some of the most effective answers were already living quietly in the desert, waiting to be remembered. The future of water in the Southwest may depend on blending the old with the new, honoring indigenous knowledge while applying modern science. If that marriage succeeds, then the survival strategies that once guided a small tribe through blistering heat may very well guide entire nations through the uncertainties of tomorrow. So, how did Native Americans drink in the middle of the desert? It wasn't luck, and it certainly wasn't a miracles. It was knowledge, carefully built layer by layer, passed down through generations. They read the land the way we read books, and in doing so, they turned what looked like a barren wasteland into a true homeland. The desert didn't defeat them. They mastered it. Their survival was not only about finding water, but about understanding it, respecting it, and treating it as sacred. Now let me put the question to you. If you were dropped in the middle of the desert tomorrow, which method would you bet your life on? The cactus, the hidden rock pools, or the ancient canals? Share your answer in the comments, because I'd love to see which of us would actually make it out alive. And if you enjoyed this journey through history and survival, don't forget to give this video a like, hit that subscribe button, and ring the bell so you never miss another story like this one. The desert may be silent, but our community doesn't have to be. Let's keep the conversation going.